In this episode of Energy Solutions, we speak to Derrick Kualapai, General Secretary and Treasurer of the United Association of Journeymen and Apprentices of the Plumbing and Pipe Fitting Industry of the United States and Canada. I'm your host, Todd Snitchler, and you're listening to Energy Solutions, a podcast from the Electric Power Supply Association where we showcase the voices and stories behind a changing energy grid. His first appearance with us being at this past year's Competitive Power Summit as a speaker on our panel that addressed how to meet rapidly rising load growth, Derrick Kualapai brings to our podcast more insights from America's manufacturing industry and energy workforce, a perspective which is absolutely critical to the energy industry and the nation's infrastructure as a whole. Derrick outlines the ways in which unions and energy companies have and can continue to work together to achieve the nation's goals. He shares what he looks for from policymakers and regulators, and shares his union's view on balancing decarbonization efforts with continued economic growth, impacts to jobs and the workforce, and the need for reliable power. Let's hear from Derrick. Derrick, we want to thank you so much for joining us on this month's podcast. The last time we were together, we were at the Competitive Power Summit in March, and we were very grateful for your participation there. I thought that was a great conversation. Your comments were very well received by the audience. And I think it's important to note for listeners that you've been involved in the union world for a long time and have a depth of understanding that maybe some of our listeners don't. So what about the trade union space first appealed to you? Kind of how'd you get into this side of the world? And then kind of talk a little bit about your experience.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Great question. So first of all, thanks for having me at that competitive summit. I felt very honored to be a participant there, and what a great opportunity. I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that, I'm a legacy second generation steam fitter welder. My dad was a welder, and so I've sort of followed in his footsteps. That's really the primary answer there. And then, of course, I'd also be lying to you if I didn't say that the money was really good. You know, union wages are some of the best wages out of there. They're a livable wage, one that somebody can raise a family with dignity. And so, sort of legacy, money. But as I sort of kicked the can down the road, it was really about learning a skill set, learning welding. I welded in the refineries and power plants up and down the state of California. I learned a skill set that ultimately can take me from the deserts of Saudi Arabia to the depths of the Siberian plains. And so learning that skill set that I could apply anywhere in the world was something that was always interesting to me. And then, of course, building with my hands, changing the landscape, driving by a facility and say, man, I had a hand in building that. I think more recently, Todd, probably right around year 2012, when I got into union leadership, I started to understand the terminology of voice and vote, right? Having a voice in my union and having a say on how things could look like for the masses. And so that voice and vote, having a seat at the table, really has drawn me into the international space that I'm serving now.
Great. That is super helpful background, and what a resume. I mean, that's pretty impressive. So as you and I have talked about before, the energy sector has experienced significant transformation in the recent years, with more certainly on the horizon. Ambitious decarbonization goals, regulations from the EPA, conversations in the policy and regulatory world that are all addressing permitting and siting, transmission reform, new technology and load growth like AI and data centers and advanced manufacturing. All of them are driving considerable load growth, which is all new demand. And we see that as an opportunity, but also as challenges for the power system. How do you and your fellow members look at these changes? Are you seeing shifts in the manufacturing and the union space as a result of these, or are these just kind of things you've been dealing with for a long time? Or are you also seeing kind of an increase in the intensity and the cadence of some of these changes?
Yeah, good question. I think we sort of talk around here at 3 Park Place here in Annapolis about the reshoring of American manufacturing.
Yep.
We are seeing just on the outset with the BIL, the IRA, and the chips, some of the EV and battery data storage, and then, of course, the semiconductor. And, part of the issue is we have lost some skill set over the years, right? And so that manufacturing is coming back. and we're faced with this challenge of how to build things again, and the processes of what it takes to get from point A to point B on a project. That's sort of the first part of it, the reshoring of American manufacturing, the loss of the skill set. But as you mentioned in your question, we're also seeing this tidal wave of decarbonization.
Yeah.
And what does that really mean? I think in our experience within our organization, we sort of see the far west and the far east, whether it be California, New York, sort of understanding because they're more hit with it, as where a middle of America, people are still scratching their head about what decarbonization really means in the grand scheme of things. So that's sort of a shift and a change when you talk about decarbonization. Electrification is another thing that is very heavy on the West Coast, very heavy on the East Coast in terms of those states. But again, middle of America is still sort of trying to catch up with what does that really look like. And so right now we're being hit with about 11 different semiconductor projects that are taking place across the United States as we speak. We are seeing about 8 different EV battery, electric vehicle and battery plants that are being built. And so that shift and change in that reshoring of American manufacturing coming back is something that we have to respond to for manpower, because Todd, as you know, we do one thing only, and that's supplied manpower, skilled and trained to our signatory contractors.
Yep. I mean, you mentioned right there 19 projects, all of which are large. I mean, the scale varies by plant to plant, but that's a lot of manpower. Just, I hadn't thought of this until you mentioned it, but can you kind of give us a scale at a project like that? How many folks are on the job site doing the work? I don't think people appreciate that. I certainly don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'll use the state of Ohio for an example. A huge Intel plant, semiconductor being built in a state that has zero semiconductor experience when it comes to construction workers. And that's either union or non-union. There just isn't any semiconductor in the state of Ohio. So it presents a very unique challenge for the building trades, and particularly the UA, because there is a very specific skill set. But I want to drill down on your question, because you asked something very specific. That project is going to take 7,000 construction workers.
Wow.
Okay, 7,000 construction workers. It's very important to note that 3,000 of those 7,000 will be UA members, plumbers, pipe fitters, sprinkler fitters, HVACR techs.
Yeah.
We cover a wide range variety of different crafts under our organization, and we're relevant on all 4 of those areas. 3,000 out of those 7,000 will be our members. But here is the most important part that I want to share with you. In order to get 3,000 members to work on a project, we will go through an attrition because people will get on the job. They may find out that this job isn't for them. So we'll actually go through 9,000 people to get 3,000.
Wow. That's a significant workforce.
It is. It really
All right.
is.
Well, I'm sure we'll come back to that. So this is a great example, though, to kind of lead me into my next question for you, because you've got a lot of experience in helping people think about how collaboration between unions and industry stakeholders can be crucial for advancing both worker interests, but also what's the industry, regardless of which one it is, what are they trying to achieve? Can you talk a little about some successful partnerships or initiatives where unions and energy companies have had mutually beneficial working relationships? And really, maybe it's better to ask you to finish that with, how can some of the energy companies work better with some of their union partners?
Yeah, great question. Again, you've got some really good questions. So our flagship successful partnership is a word that we use called tripartite.
Okay.
Let me just say to you that today's union, 2024 building trade unions, are not the same unions our grandfathers ran back in the day. And to give you a little bit of contrast there, used to be sort of the unions and unions versus the contractors, right? Yeah. Well, those days are gone. Mainly they're gone because contractors have expressed the fact that Well, in order for us to make a profit, we really have to partner with our unions, and
Okay.
so we understood them. We heard them loud and clear, but it couldn't just stop there. We really needed to bring in the end user. So the word tripartite encompasses the union, the contractor, and the end user or project owner. And when decisions are made, it is paramount that all three of the legs to that stool are present,
Mm-hmm.
that decisions are not made without one or the other not being present. It is very, very important when we talk about manpower and when we talk about onboarding, when we talk about all the things that we need to get the job going.
Mm-hmm.
Those are decisions that cannot be made single-handedly by any one group. It has to be a collective effort. So tripartite sort of answers that question. And this really came out of the gas and oil industry when
Sure.
there was many years ago shutdowns and turnarounds that didn't come in on time or were late because we had cost overruns or supply material, whatever the situation was, and then the finger pointing started
Right.
to happen, right, amongst the project owner, the contractor, and the unions. Well, what tripartite does is it eliminates all the finger
Mm-hmm.
pointing, it eliminates all the lying in the room, and it really forces the three entities to come up with a successful project. And so
Yeah.
tripartite is one. I think the second successful partnership, Todd, is training, joint labor management with our signatory contractors. Apprenticeship has been
Mm-hmm.
recognized for exactly 70 years. We figured out the secret sauce 70 years ago and been perfecting it since that time. The beauty of that, and the reason why I flagged that for us, is because when you talk about a free market society, you really should take a look at the bona fide apprenticeship programs that are ran by joint labor management between contractors and unions, mainly because we collectively bargain all that we receive in terms of benefits, and one of those things is training. So training is paid for by the member who decides to put X amount of cents
Mm-hmm.
towards training, and then collectively between the contractor and the union, we come up with the curriculum for the projects that are at hand, the projects
Sure.
that are coming up, some of the stuff that we've already mentioned. And so it requires us to keep our fingers on the pulse, which
Mm-hmm.
we do, understanding where the market's going and where the trends are. But that's a successful example of how partnerships work. And then the last thing is a study that we recently conducted, the United Association and the Mechanical Contractors Association. We partnered with Independent Project Analysis,
Okay.
which is a group that typically does surveys for Fortune 500 construction companies when they need some hard data. And they decided to do this survey for us. And the interesting findings I'll point out to you is that total construction costs are 4% lower, significantly less risk of cost overruns and schedule delays on union projects, which is which is very significant because if you think about what a contractor makes in terms of margin, right, profit,
Right.
if you're in that single digit number or percentile, that 4% could kick you up into double digits, which is a
That's right.
which is a big deal. The study also showed that unions are 14% higher in productivity. And that is extremely important for end users to understand because, we all understand that labor is the biggest cost
Sure.
when building a project. And, everybody wants guarantees that their project's going to come on time, under budget, but really be productive, right?
That's
Really
right.
be productive. So at the end of the day, it's this study will help some of our owners, and in hopes that they can become allies, and hopefully, as you mentioned, how can the energy companies really collaborate with unions and signatory contractors?
Yeah, because you said the magic words, on time and under budget are two things that folks really, really appreciate. So It's interesting that you bring that up because with energy expansion pushing more projects towards sustainable and green technologies, that suggests there's going to be some new skills that are needed for your members. And frankly, as our side of the table evolves on new projects, trying to think through some of that. How do you see that training as essential for workers in the energy sector? And how's your union addressing resolution or trying to address some of those concerns? It sounds this training thing is particularly interesting to me because you're looking ahead and saying these are the skills that'll be needed, and that's exactly what we're trying to give our members, which I would think for a customer, they're saying thank you. Like we appreciate you taking care of what we need instead of sending somebody who's getting on the job training on my project.
Yeah, yeah. So, listen, 135-year organization. We've been around since October of 1889. I've mentioned bona fide apprenticeship
Yeah.
programs have been recognized for 70 years, and we really, really believe that we've perfected that. Todd, we do one thing well and one thing well, and that is build piping systems.
Yep.
Piping systems of all kind, whether they're high pressure, whether they're low pressure, whether they're just drain, waste, vent, no pressure at all. And so um, we believe that because of our training, listen, we spend $250 million annually. And that goes back to the last question of joint labor management and how
Yeah.
much money we actually spend. $250 million annually across 300 bona fide training centers in the United States and Canada, all paid for by our membership because they have chosen to allocate their money to training. It's one of those issues that we don't get a whole lot of argument about with our
Sure.
members. They want the best training. And so in order to get that, you got to pay for it. And so as a drill down to your question, I think the unions, we have the training down, but really where we're effective is we have to monitor the industry, see where the
Hmm.
industry is going, identify the need. And in this particular case, here we are in September of 2024. The big three things that are happening are semiconductors. We've got EV battery plants and a
Hmm.
whole lot of data storage taking
Yeah.
place. So we monitor, we identify, and then we take a look at, do we need to do any research and development on any new technologies? And fortunately for us, piping is either going to be made out of metal or it's going to be made out of plastic. And we feel that we have that training down. So it's really targeting what the need is. And I'll go back to the state of Ohio,
Yeah.
the Intel project, 80% of the piping on that project is going to be plastic piping. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
going to be, PVC,
Yeah.
CPVC, ABS, all of the exotic plastic type piping systems that are going to be required to, and I don't know if you know this or not, but the end game in a semiconductor obviously is to make a chip. In
Yep.
order to make a chip, you have to have in the neighborhood of about 162 different gases that actually produce that one chip. And so 162 different piping systems that carry different gases, all of different pressures, different amounts. It's a pretty Herculean task
Yeah.
to figure out what the need is on a project like Intel. So monitor, identifying, conducting a little bit of R&D, and then targeting what those training needs need to be.
Yeah. You offered two numbers in that answer that are just a little mind-boggling. 162 different piping systems explains why when people say, "How come that building's not done?" Well, there's a lot going on inside the walls while people are getting ready, and $250 million annually spent on training. I mean, I think that's probably the thing that would surprise people the most. That is a huge number when you think about it. And you note 300 training locations. That's no small task, but that's a lot of focus on getting people skilled up to be able to do the work. And I think that speaks well of what your organization is trying to do.
No doubt. No
So
doubt.
how does this whole energy expansion, as we refer to it, impact labor? Are you adding new members, or are there things that your members are doing to try to figure out how to engage, or are you seeing a shift in the thinking as people approach it? Because it seems like there's an awful lot going on all at one time. You mentioned the attrition rate just for that one project is 3 to 1. So we need 9,000 people to get 3,000 to get through the project, but that's just one project, and we've got all these other things happening. How are you thinking about some of these other things? Is it a similar kind of number, or do you take a different approach? Kind of how do you think about that?
Yeah, so the key word here is impact, right? How's
Yeah,
it impacting labor? And certainly, growing the membership is priority number one for us. Hats off to our general president, Mark McManus. 2016, he took the helm, and his number one mandate was that we needed to grow. We couldn't stay stagnant, and this was all before BIL, IRA, and
sure.
CHIPS. And so we started down this pathway in 2016, really to get a concentrated effort on bringing people into the trades. Again, this isn't our grandfather's union anymore,
Right.
right? This is really about expanding and growing. And so growing the membership, growing the market share is certainly impacting us because we got to go out and find those people. They're out there. We just have to find them. Let me give you some metrics.
Yeah.
Right around 2016, we were sitting at about 327,000 members. Today, I'm proud to report we're sitting at exactly at 381,000 members. In the last 4 years, we've had this huge trend. And let me just explain this to you. So, last 4 years, for every month, we have netted 1,000 brand new members into our organization
Okay.
across, again, the United States and Canada. I share that with you because if you take the entirety of our local unions, which roughly is about 280 local unions in the
Okay.
United Association, our average membership is about 1,000 members. Okay. So the way we see this is that if in the last 4 years, for every month, we have been netting 1,000 brand new
Yeah.
members, we're almost taking that as if though we're chartering a brand new local
Yep.
union every month for the last 4 years. I will say this as a very bold statement. We're probably one of the very few building trades unions that is growing in the capacity that we are. But what perfect timing
Yeah.
because of all of this work that's coming. We're able to poise ourselves to meet the need for skilled and trained workforce. Another impact is union jobs. Listen, we're the minority. We're not the
Hmm.
majority. We're the minority. Union density for building trades is sitting anywhere, depends on who you talk to, 10 to 13%. That's not a very big number. And so, in order for us to grow, we
Hmm.
also have to have the jobs to be able to put people on, right?
Sure.
Hence the advocacy of what we do on our training and trying to convince entities like the federal government what our value is. And so, really, it's projects and jobs that will equal union growth. Hopefully,
Yeah.
that answers the question.
No, I think that's spot on. So, as you look ahead, what do you think are some of the major challenges, or we always like to classify things as opportunities that you foresee for the trade unions in the energy sector? I mean, how do you think about planning to tackle those challenges and leverage opportunities for both industry and for workers? I mean, clearly the training programs are critically important. Your growth and, I mean, the way you described it, I thought was really helpful to say we're adding a local every month as you've gone through. But how do you think about how you're going to continue to deliver on the what the system will need, but also what your members need?
Yeah, I think I want to answer this question in the mindset of a taxpayer or
Okay.
ratepayer. Um, the answer is we got to keep the lights on, right? That I mean, reliability is probably the key here. And so, what does that look like for your average American that comes home from work and they want to flip the light switch? They want to know that that's going to turn on, and it's
That's
going to
right.
turn on every time. And then,
Yep.
once it does turn on, and as we sort of take a look at this trend of phasing out fossil fuels, what does that space look like? At the end of the day, the answer is the challenge is reliability. We got to have reliability, and
Yep.
so I think we have our work cut out for us. And I mentioned a little bit of this at the competitive summit. The politicians that we elect, and Todd, let me just say, I don't care if you have a D at the end of your name or an R
Right.
or an I, it doesn't matter. Um, Politicians often are convinced of these outlandish plans. And I spoke a little bit about just relying on a base power load of wind and solar.
Hmm.
I think the challenge in answering your question is let's have a balanced plan, right? A balanced plan needs to go hand in hand. I think that if you do have a balanced plan, you'll get the reliability that we're sort of hoping for. And so there's two ways. You got to have a responsible energy plan. It can't just be wind and solar. I say that it needs to be the all above approach. We can talk about that in a minute. But it's also about getting energy transformation right, right? If we don't get energy transformation right, we're gonna have blackouts, we're gonna have brownouts, we're gonna have skyrocketing electrical bills. So we really gotta, I think, key in on those two: responsible energy planning and getting energy transformation right. Reliability is key,
Hmm.
and as a taxpayer, we just want the lights to come on. That's all we want.
Yeah, and at that point, we are in violent agreement that reliability has to be first. And you're using a different term, but I call it reality-based thinking about how the
Right, right.
system's actually going to have to function because the delta between aspirational policies and operational realities is growing. We've got to shrink
Yeah,
that delta and make sure that consumers, you said, keep the lights on. I always say lights on, beer cold, water warm. That's what people
yeah,
want.
yeah.
And they don't want to pay a lot for it. So if we can meet those three objectives, you and I are both going to be able to sleep very soundly at night. People will be happy, and that'll be all right.
Right.
So if you were the king for the day, or you could have your wish list of policies, what policies or regulations would you change or would you favor? Or what conversations would you move to the top of the pile in order to make sure that we can meet the goals of a reliable system while meeting the needs of the members of your organization and other workers that are making sure that they can help deliver the outcome policymakers say they want?
The all above approach.
Yeah.
Again, we can't just rely on wind and solar. The all above approach encompasses carbon capture sequestration, it encompasses hydrogen,
Yep.
certainly small modular reactors, waste to energy, renewable natural gas. At the end of the day, when we're transferring from fossil fuels, and if the narrative is just wind and solar, that doesn't bode very well for members of the United Association. Because again, going back to the beginning of our conversation, we
Yeah.
do one thing and one thing really well, and that's build piping systems. So clean energy is really the answer. And it doesn't always have to be fossil fuels. It could be other things like long duration pump storage, which is, basically hydroelectric, but
Yeah.
another good opportunity to utilize wind and solar, by the way. Desalinization, we should be, especially in California, where I come from, we should be building more desalinization plants. But yeah, I think if I was king for today, I would like to certainly impose the policies and legislations that would help us move forward on these alternative clean energies and really do something with permitting reform. Permitting reform is that monkey on our back. It's monkey on labor's back.
Yeah.
We got to do something about that.
No, I think that's very helpful. And I think we share your concern about permitting and siting because it doesn't matter what the resource is. If you can't get anything constructed, we're going to be going in the wrong direction. And so we certainly support efforts to accelerate that. It doesn't mean you walk away from environmental obligations. It just means you got to be more thoughtful about how we do it. And helping to meet a sustainable future is going to require a lot of things, maybe on timelines that are different than what people think. And the
Sure, sure.
technologies, as you note, are going to evolve. And there's probably something out there that neither of us knows anything about. You certainly are hopeful that it includes the pipe fitters to be able to move whatever that needs to be done. But in the end, I think innovation and development of new technologies is going to help us meet the moment. And certainly we hope that we're partnering with your members and others to make sure that we can deliver that outcome.
Absolutely.
With that, Derrick, I appreciate your time. We have had a great conversation. Are there any closing thoughts that you would share? Maybe the one thing that you wish people would understand better? I mean, you've really helped, I think, open our eyes to some things that are not the way people might think they used to be. But if there was one thing you'd have people think about as they look at how this partnership needs to evolve going forward, what would that be?
Yeah. So there's a phrase out there about just transition, right? And I
Yeah.
think we all look at this a little bit differently. And so labor looks at just transition as the all above approach. But the flip side of that coin is the counter narrative, and that's let's take the workforce of the United Association 381,000 of us,
Yeah.
and let's retrain them to install wind and solar. And so, I've seen the narrative run with the politicians. Certainly, environmentalists have convinced them that's the way to go. Just transition can be exactly what you and I have been discussing on this podcast. So, yeah, I think people need to educate themselves on what just transition should look like for them, and it's an important concept. It's not going to go away.
Yeah.
We're continuing to talk about what just transition. We're probably in the middle of it, right? Have been for quite some time. We're actually doing something about it. So I think that would be a takeaway that folks need to take a little bit harder look at.
Yeah, and that's a great note for us to close on. Derrick, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking time to chat with us and share your perspectives. I think it's vitally important to the conversation and making sure that all the stakeholders are having an opportunity to participate in the discussion. I'm really grateful for your time today.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Energy Solutions. Check out the show notes for a study from Independent Project Analysis, or IPA, containing some key numbers on the ways union labor contributes towards manufacturing. For more insight from Derrick, listen to his panel at our last Competitive Power Summit. If you like this episode, please share it on social media or with your coworkers, friends, and family. You can also connect with us on X at EPSA News, on LinkedIn, and on Threads at Electric Power Supply. And subscribe, follow, leave a rating, or comment on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Energy Solutions is brought to you by the Electric Power Supply Association. EPSA represents America's competitive power suppliers, which bring about 150,000 megawatts of power generation resources to customers throughout the United States. The music in this episode is written, produced, and performed by Let Me Hold That, Ltd. Discover the power of competition at www.epsa.org.